Hey everyone, welcome back to The Negotiation. My name is Todd Embley and I am your host. And we are pleased to present this episode with Jeff Daggett. He is the founder and CEO of Aisonne, a brand and retail development and management company offering brand, retail, hospitality, and licensing management services and representation in Japan and the United States. Jeff's background includes over 3 decades of experience at leading global companies in the Asia Pacific region, specifically in investment banking, real estate, retail operations, merchandising, marketing, and general management. So we hope you enjoyed the show.
All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to The Negotiation. My name is Todd Embley, and I am the host. And I'm excited to welcome Jeff Daggett, founder and CEO of Aisonne. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Todd, I'm really happy to be here with you.
Yeah, me too. Happy to have you. Let's quickly put you on the map. Where are you right now that we're recording you from?
Well, as you might be able to see in the background, this is actually downtown Tokyo. This is actually the view out my window. I'm in Hito, right next to Adisagawa Park. For anyone familiar with Tokyo, that's like just down the street from Roppongi, pretty much in the middle of the loop line.
Right on. How long have you lived there?
Off and on for over 30 years. I first came in 82 and then came again in 85 and then came again in 94 and really haven't left since 94. So I've just dated myself.
I know. That's I do it all the time too. Trust me, it just happens. I'm sure the audience is totally fine with that, but that's a long time. That's quite a tenure in in another country. So this is going to be fascinating. You've done a lot. You have seen a lot. You've experienced a lot of things macroeconomically that have like on up and down and fluctuated. A lot of companies have come and companies have gone, and technology has come and, well, really just stayed around. So yeah, let's dive into that first, and let's start with a quick introduction to the work that you're doing now.
So right now with Aisonne, I spend a lot of time helping businesses come to Japan, and now as the yen grows a little weaker, I'm spending more time helping some of my Japanese friends find markets outside of Japan. My background's primarily in apparel, so I'm really doing a lot in what they call soft lines, but because of my licensing background, I'm serving as licensing agent for a few small media businesses as well. And that's pretty much the core.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. And we are going to dive into some of that apparel right after I ask you a question, maybe personally. How did you end up in Japan? And I know it was a few times, but walk us through, how'd you end up there? Why'd you go back? Why'd you stay?
I happily backed into it. My life is a series of happy plan Bs. I grew up in and still have a house in and go back as often as I can to a little town called Placerville, California. That's between Lake Tahoe and Sacramento in Northern California, for anyone not familiar. And growing up, my heroes and the folks who were kind of pillars of the community were, they were doctors, lawyers, CPAs. I looked at how long it would take to get through school for all of those, and thought I was making the expedient choice and deciding to become an accountant. But about into my sophomore year of college and burning out in cost accounting courses, which I was taking without context because I hadn't had a lot of business experience, I felt the need to take what I think in other places is called a gap year. So I had some friends in the dormitory, Japanese friends, Korean friends, and in discussing with different folks, an acquaintance of mine got me a position in Japan teaching English. And a lot of us come to Asia that way. And it's a great way to get to know the customer because you're with them and you think you're teaching them, but they are absolutely teaching you. Mm-hmm. And so I spent a year and the thing that helped me was it was my first year in Japan. I was the youngest instructor at the English school I was working at. So I got all the classes no one else wanted. So I was sent to Kawasaki Steel because you had to leave the school to teach that course. And I was sent to Fuji Oil and I had to leave the school to teach that course. It was in a 30-minute train ride to go down and, teaching the division managers in charge of shutdown maintenance for the refinery, like, real hardcore. We're the guys that, rebuilt or built Japan. And so again, here I am thinking I'm teaching, and I do believe I was able to make some contribution in teaching my native language, but I absolutely sponged the kind of like the value system and the way folks thought. I remember at one point confiding with this one bucho or division manager that I was teaching at Fuji Oil that, I was taking accounting and I was burnt out a little bit. And he goes, you can hire accountants. And it was kind of like mind blown, kind of, which has turned out to be a really good thing, because all the folks who've worked with me in finance know that I absolutely need all the professionals around me I can get in finance and everything else, by the way.
Let me ask you another question. You've been there a long time. How's your Japanese?
I would call it fluent, but understand as a native speaker, it's the work of a lifetime. And even through COVID here, I would have to say my English has also fallen off dramatically. So as a result, I've just gotten back together with an old Japanese TV producer friend that I met like 30 years ago on a project. And we started up a small project. He goes, Jeff, your Japanese sucks. And I think he's right. I mean, we're having that conversation in Japanese, but his point being, I could be better. When I speak Japanese, no doubt I am framing or initiating my thoughts in an English sentence structure. And even though I'm speaking Japanese, it's not quite the way someone who had just come up through the Japanese school system would speak, no doubt. So while I believe I'm conversant, I'm able to speak there. So
I think that there's a measure of success that you can take away from somebody telling you that your Japanese or your Mandarin sucks.
Yes.
Because for a very long time, people are generally understanding that the assumption and the knowledge apparently is that you are not very good. It sucks. And then, and so they just appreciate that you're trying, because they can see that you're trying and fumbling. And then you get to a point where it really does seem like you know the language, and then they can say, wow, it's really not very good. But
yes,
without the context of how much accolades it took, along the way to get to it actually sucks. So worthwhile pointing out. Okay. You took a gap year. Funny enough, ended up at the Gap. So let's dive into your work in Japan with the Gap. It was just under 3 years. You were launching Gap in Japan, and I just want to know what that experience was like between, in the areas of 94 and 95.
Yeah, it was an incredible experience. I came out of graduate school, managed through some acquaintances at Mitsui Fudosan who had some inkling that Gap was interested in going to Japan to get an interview with Don Fisher. And this was in late 1991, maybe could have even been early 1992. And his first interview question, which I've always used when I'm working in retail ever since, is, can you see yourself working in the stores? Because for anyone in retail, this, the store is company headquarters, and company headquarters is back office. So it's really important to understand in that business how product comes in, gets on the floor, how it leaves in a customer's shopping bag. Obviously now we're doing a lot of this digitally, but the concept is the same. Mm-hmm. And knowing that, I was really lucky in that interview, because I was later told that a lot of folks looking for jobs in strategy or something like that in retail will kind of miss that and say, no, I was actually thinking of working in your headquarters, which again is back office. I said, absolutely. So he said no promises, but in his office, he picked the phone up, called a local store manager and said, "You do not have to hire this person, but I'm going to send him to you. And if you can use him, see how he does." And so I started on the floor, seasonal hire, $6.50 an hour. Now, we knew that there was, there would be, other opportunities. And so I learned a lot. I learned to show up. I learned to be on time, learned to pick things up off the floor. Had to be taught to see an empty hanger on the wall because I'd walk by it until someone taught me to make that distinction. All the things that you retail pros out there already know, I learned on the floor. And then after a couple months of establishing trust and actually touring a few of the potential Japanese partners through the stores, got my first consulting job with them. So I actually started in the headquarters concurrently as working at $6.50 an hour as a seasonal hire in the store, which I did not stop doing. Was working in headquarters as a consultant and working with, actually every Tuesday, I would go in to meet with Don Fisher because the Japan expansion was very much his baby, and we built the business plan. So I want to be clear that I was a part of starting the business of Gap in Japan, right, but it was a team effort. And I should probably better characterize my role on my resume at that point as being scribe, because I kind of talked to everyone and pulled the plan together.
Right. Okay. Fair to say that was your first professional role outside of teaching at a brand in Japan.
Yes. Yeah. I had a stint at Nomura Securities as an analyst. That taught me a lot. But my first actual role at a brand building a business was at the Gap, and I am eternally grateful to them.
Okay, so when you were there in the early days, what did you think that you were doing well, and maybe some things that you got wrong?
So I think the things that the Gap did well was just being the Gap. So particularly up until that point, most businesses in Japan were still coming over with a partner, like a trading company partner or a large retail partner, and they were done through joint ventures. We had the good fortune to, my boss at the time, Bill Fisher, knew Steve Burke at the Disney store well. They were on good terms, and the Disney store had just opened in Japan, and they were one of the first US retailers to open in Japan, independent of any partner. And the Gap, the Gap team also felt, it was really important to go direct. There were several partners that the Gap talked to, but in the end, the decision was to open direct. And in the process of coming to Japan at any time, not even that time, years later, I had the opportunity to help some of the Apple folks as they were getting ready to open Japan. And a lot of folks will tell you, you have to change what you're doing to succeed in Japan or wherever you go. And this is true, but you can't lose the essence of what you are. To use an analogy in coming to Japan, in drinking the tea, you don't want to lose sight of who you are, and try to become so good at tea ceremony. You're never going to out Japanese the Japanese. You're never going to out Chinese the Chinese. You come as you, and you bring what you bring. And so the thing that I think made Gap successful, and the Gap was really good about recognizing, was to come with the product it had. Did it adapt? Absolutely. Everyone who's in apparel knows you change specs. There's a list of things that you amend to succeed in the market that you're coming to. But it was really important that the essence of the brand stay the essence of the brand, because that's what customers were going and then did come to the stores for.
Okay. In that area of the world where you were essentially cutting your teeth on understanding it, do you have any examples of experiences, learnings, and growth in yourself that you took from that role into subsequent roles?
Yeah, patience, Definitely became a better listener as one's Japanese partners were explaining what typically needed to be done to be successful in Japan. We would spend a lot of time listening to that. We were fortunate to, before Gap went to Japan, it had a program called the International Sales Program. So it already had some experience selling its products in Japan. At the time, the products were sold through a really old and well-established denim trading company here called Eiko Shoji, and the Takahashi family that ran that business was just amazing in the advice they gave on what modifications needed to be done to product, and so learn to listen, learn to respect. There's of course, we always want to be disruptive, but a lot of times the best way to be disruptive is the move gradual and then suddenly method. And so in that sense, although the Gap came to Japan, the initial moves were slow. There was one store, then there were 2 stores, and there were 3 stores, and then of course the format, the business formula is then proven. All of your real estate partners are now trusting you. They understand that you can do what you can do. You have trained staff, and then you move more quickly. So that element of patience and being willing to be methodical and not dinging yourself because in year 1 you haven't opened 30 stores. It's important to be realistic in a rollout.
So at that time, of course, this is pre-e-commerce. So the
Yes.
brick and mortar, those retail locations, the choices made around those. That's what I want to explore right now. So as you're growing, I'm curious as to what kind of decision-making rubrics were in place when you were looking at brick and mortar and retail there in a place like Japan.
So the trade-offs in opening are always, do you go to the suburbs where it's easier to get locations and open quicker, or do you open that choice flagship location at the center of town despite the time, effort, and expense that's going to take? And at the time, still conventional wisdom was that you really needed to open your first store in a real flagship like location. That's news. That's what gets you your PR. And more importantly, it's what the Japanese industry at the time looked to as a kind of a marker of a business that understood how to do things right. And so Gap worked very hard and was very fortunate to have a couple kind of champions actually in Japanese department stores. So Gap's first landlord was Hankyu department store, actually in the Ginza. So because Hankyu controlled space right across from the Sony flagship building in Ginza, and because they were willing to put Gap in there, that really gave Gap a chance to start from Ginza, so that when it was ready to open its next store out in the suburban but still very important area of Tamagawa, that store didn't look like it had opened first, and that maybe Gap didn't know how to open stores in Japan according to what was conventional wisdom at the time. The wonderful thing about conventional wisdom is someone will come along and change it for us, and sometimes we'll do it ourselves. But at the time, that was the conventional wisdom, and it was really thanks to Hankyu department store for that first location. And the third location was Isetan in Shinjuku, putting a Gap store on the second floor in Isetan there, and those were also kind of stamps of approval or of a business knowing how to do business in Japan. And at that time, I think that really helped Gap get started.
What about things like negotiating space or contracts or price? What was it like going through those processes in Japan?
At Gap was really fortunate to have a really really good development team. Don Fisher himself, having come from a real estate background, that was really part of the heart of the operations of Gap. And there was another real estate development professional that came in and did that. But I did learn a lot observing him do those negotiations. And it's exact, it's what they were. But I think that Gap was fortunate in that there was a lot of interest in having Gap come in. So my recollection now is that there wasn't a lot of convincing that needed to be done, particularly after lining up Ginza Hankyu and Hidesaburo Matsuda, the then managing director of Hankyu, kind of having given Gap the a seal of approval by providing space in Ginza. I think that also in turn helped a lot of the other conversations to go more smoothly.
I know e-commerce, we all know e-commerce has drastically impacted and changed retail, but wanted to maybe just tie off the conversation around Gap here, just asking if you think just really around retail, which isn't dead, it's still alive, would those conversations have changed just from what you said about, and I think back to those times, I think there was, and correct me if I'm wrong, but an allure to foreign brands, because I just don't know if the world was as global in product and retail as much as it is today. And I've thought that there was an aspect of not rolling out the red carpet, but like a really wanting to expand the city's image as being truly global. That's a part of it. So you get some treatment that goes along with that.
Right.
Now, if you're going and you're looking to do expand retail and brick and mortar, would things have changed? Would relationship management and negotiations have changed?
I think so. I think it's a lot harder now to make the case for, it can be done, but to make the case for how you're different. But it's never easy to do that. That's always the challenge. And even for Gap in the beginning, there were ahead of Gap opening in Japan from 1994, 95 onwards, the Gap really put in the legwork from 1992. So from 19, well, and even before that, when I was able to start with the Gap's international division, I inherited a filing cabinet of over 10 years of inquiries from Japan, just on Banana Republic, for example. Right. So there was already a lot of interest in, Gap as a company, then the Gap brands, but Gap still spent a couple years making its case. Spent time with Nobukazu Muto, who at the time was the managing director of Isetan, and he and his New York office lead spent 3 days just touring stores and explaining how the Gap merchandise model worked. Department stores generally have a twice a year markdown cycle, and we were explaining how kind of similar to more what we see in e-commerce today, how there were multiple drops across the course of a year and constantly marking down, constantly checking to see what's not working and marking that down, moving it to clearance, something that the department store model in Japan at the time was not set up to do. But there was I think that aspect also was very attractive to Mr. Muto and his team. So, we did spend a lot of time making that case. Today, you still have to make that case. I think it's harder. Mostly because the Japanese consumer is what we call, I now call it post consumer. We kind of went from consumer to post consumer, where no one had to have that LVMH bag, had to have the bag, and now we're in a place where if Gucci does a really cool Doraemon collaboration, well, that's interesting, I'll get that. But there's no, in Japan now, relatively speaking, because there are cohorts who still that Gucci bag or LVMH bag is exactly the social signal that the brands expect and need them to be. But there's a much larger cohort here in Japan that's willing to go, yeah, but amaze me. So that's, I think, part of the challenge that we have here in Japan right now is you need to have a different, and very exciting story. The bright point of all this, though, is a wise retail strategist once told me there are no overstored markets, only under merchandised ones. Meaning, no matter what we do, we always have an opportunity to get, and it's storytelling, compelling product, attractively priced, well merchandised, including, visual merchandise, whether it's on it. That is still always the opportunity, and it's always in front of us. So, I would not discourage anyone from, coming and being, the next blockbuster business in Japan or anywhere.
Last question on the Gap and your time there. You also initiated recruitment for the first management team for Gap Japan. Just wondering if you could speak to a few of the key principles that you were using when you approached that task.
So, frankly, my first heavy recruiting opportunity was when I moved to Levi's, because at the time I came over with Japan, I was working for a country lead, and I was his director of operations. So the role I had was more of helping and talking to, but the decision was really made, and as it should have been, by the country manager. But again, it was looking for people who had the linguistic ability, because we were not fully operating in Japanese at the time. We were still operating in English, and still had a huge team back in San Francisco that needed to be communicated with. So obviously it was language ability, it was serviceability, and those sorts of things. So.
Okay, yeah, and we're gonna move into that now. After the Gap, as you mentioned, you went to Levi's.
Yeah.
And just so people can start chalking up the resume
Yes.
notches, then you went to Nike, and
yes.
Just for time, I think we should just jump straight into the time at Nike as well.
Yep.
And the first question out of the gate with regards to Nike that I wanted to ask was based on really how well Nike has done globally for so long. They're just an iconic brand, and they're iconic globally. I wanted to just understand maybe a little bit and have you just spend a minute talking about what it is that they really, really do well that gives them that sustainability around being an iconic brand. What are they doing better than anybody else, and how they've managed to maintain that or sustain that, in your opinion? And then how did you see that manifest and be able to continue upon entering Japan?
So I had the opportunity to join Nike right in the middle of the Just Do It years, and I think that kind of encapsulates the attractiveness. No matter where you go, there's this can-do spirit, that, and everything aspirational. Nike clearly uses amazing aspirational athletes to tell the story, and at the same time, always lets every customer know, anyone with at the time we used to talk a lot, anyone with a body is an athlete. This too is you in your way, in your life. So it was aspirational and accessible at the same time, and I think that's really important. It's understandable that one always wants to go for the aspirational, but in doing that, it's important to not get too far ahead of the customer or use role models that may seem aspirational but maybe turn out to be, because they're just too out of reach. So like, for example, in Japan was very careful to use athletes here in local baseball players, and like Nakata, who's a very well-known football or for American soccer player.
Soccer player, yeah.
Obviously right now, Naomi Osaka is in the news. At the time, we had this amazing aspirational tennis player called Ai Sugiyama. She was, amazing and a role model for whether you were a man or a woman. Just her stick-to-itiveness on the court was, that all of these things kind of combined, with the way Nike and Nike's longtime marketing partners at Wieden and Kennedy, again, great storytellers, were always able to put together a compelling story for why, even though there's no finish line, we're going to still cross it today.
That's right. Yeah. All about the journey, not the destination, all those things.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously Nike has had a ton of star athletes represent the brand. And I think you're absolutely right that that's been a big deal. That's been really, really important. You alluded to also a little bit of the localization of that strategy. Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, these guys are going to do a lot for the brand inside Japan, but you can't forget to also celebrate to make the brand seem a little bit more familiar and something achievable is to bring in the local star athletes as well. And as you said, it was, and I'll just jump straight to it. I know that those endorsement deals were a big part of the success that they had in the Japanese market. Is this still the case, in your opinion, for sports and fitness brands that are looking to grow in Japan?
Definitely, yes. But what you may choose as an aspirational model after you look at what everyone else is doing around you, it might be a handful of influencers. It could be a few entrepreneurs that have started that, new, really cool, athletics app. Or definitely you can still get the big baseball player. Right now in our era, in Japan, everyone's gaga over Ohtani, just like he pitches, he hits.
Shohei Ohtani.
Is Babe Ruth come back?
He might be the best baseball player that they've ever seen.
Yes. So and absolutely, you cannot beat that, and brands absolutely, where they can, associate with that. But depending on what your brand story is and your positioning, there are still ways to, be even more accessible. There are a lot of small success stories. You find someone who started a new marathon here and feature them, or there's, as a sports brand, you really do have a lot of options, and it's up to you where you want to tell the story and how you want to tell the story. And as long as it's, I believe, this is my belief, it's an opinion, as long as it's aspirational and accessible, and I think that's key. Ohtani's great, but one could argue, how accessible is he? Let's be honest, which of us is really going to be an Ohtani or in an earlier area, a Michael Jordan? There's one of those. So, there's, ideally you even combine those if you can afford an Ohtani and then tell a lot of local stories, which I think Nike did really well.
Yeah.
And does really well.
Well, you had a hand in that, in how well they do these. And, I was a participant. You were a participant. We are going to get to, learnings made via the failures, right?
Yep.
And you've agreed to kind of open up about the mistakes, and that's going to be great. We're going to get to that. But you were a part of that first ever, what was reputed to be the first ever Nike campaign that started in Japan that was actually then adopted for global use. So yes. I want you to just share about what that tell everybody what the campaign was, how it came to be, why it was so successful in Japan, and then why did they decide to take that global?
So like most great campaigns, as a marketing director, I have shamelessly taken credit for something that Wyden and Kennedy did most of the work on. So
that's why you pay them.
We had a shoe, and it was in the global line. So the shoe was not made just for Japan, but it was clear it was going to do well in Japan. And at the time, it was called Presto. And I would leave it to my former and current Nike colleagues that know better to tell me whether or not my recollection is correct, but I believe it evolved into what Nike now calls free. But Wyden and Kennedy came up with a campaign that really accentuated the fact that this was one of the first shoes, because it was built to be a little bit more price point accessible, and there were multiple colors. So the campaign was kind of mood rings for feet, different colors, and it was the first campaign where in kind of shades of future internet, we had the opportunity to use NTT Docomo's iMode. So iMode was not even 2.5G, I believe it was like 2G. It was a proprietary browser that ran on your flip phone. But again, the Wyden and Kennedy team did a great job of figuring out a way to make those shoes look really good on a postage stamp sized LCD screen, that you could you could actually take a picture on the of the posters that we had in Harajuku Station and that sort of thing, and then go find the product in the stores. And the campaign worked really well. The shoes worked really well, so well in fact that we then later copied it in apparel. And that worked so well that Uniqlo then copied Nike. So Uniqlo then a year later comes out with its first 15 colors of fleece line. Incidentally, that campaign was also done by Wyden and Kennedy, and I think there were some shots fired.
Yeah,
but that's how influential that campaign and that kind of string of successes with color choice in a comfortable, attractive, piece of merchandise. Again, compelling merchandise, attractively presented, and then that campaign actually would kind of rolled into something that was adopted in the US globally as well.
Yeah, you know what they say about imitation, best form of flattery. Yeah. However, when you're Nike, I don't think you care about flattery. When you're on top, you don't need people telling you, great job, you're on top. Okay, so, and then part of your stint with Nike, being the retail director for a couple of years, you then saw some massive success in those roles, exponential growth. I think I'm reading it right, culminating in 110 million USD in revenue, annual revenue, when you moved on to more senior roles. And yet, a Nike direct-to-consumer online or offline retail experience is a pretty unique one around the world. I would say that if somebody took you blindfolded through a mall and then plopped you into a Nike store, you'd know within about a half a second opening your eyes that you were in a Nike store. Yeah,
I would smell it at this point. I'd been in stores for long enough that I can smell the EVA, the foam.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of retail, they go with scent, right? The minute you walk into a store, you're greeted with a fragrance that defines that brand as well. I mean, and hotels. No,
I still have a response. I go in and I get excited. It's odd. I know, one of my quirks.
Yeah. No, yeah. I think it's it's tapping into a lot of emotional response, whatever, auto nervous pathology of that's involved with really driving and the culmination of those emotions that you want a consumer to feel when they walk into a store, right? What does Nike do differently in their retail presence and experiences? And what did you learn about retail in general from that environment, that role?
Well, first, I need to introduce this is of a kind of a fail to success. So I was initially interviewing at Nike, and at the time they were talking about wanting to build a Nike town in Tokyo. And in what turned out to be a fortunate, but at the time I called bait and switch. When I joined, they said, but we have this issue. We had all these Air Max 96s, and now they're just stuck in our warehouse because we made too many, and we need some help clearing merchandise. Can you open outlets for us instead? And it was the job, and it was a challenge. I mean, doing a Nike town would have been a huge challenge, but needing to open outlets, open them quickly, and also Nike had hired a lot of staff through the Air Max boom, so a lot of folks came over from the sales team to retail. And generally speaking, anywhere in the world, retail is not necessarily anyone's first choice of a career destination. If you're already right, you can empathize with them, right? If you've come in, your day-to-day job has been to go in and sell to high level meetings with Foot Locker and whatnot, and then someone tells you, we don't want to lay you off, can you go help these new guys that are starting retail? But I will say, to the credit of every one of those salespeople, they were invaluable to getting Nike's retail business up and running, because they knew the product, they were on it, and so we built a team that was backed with a lot of product knowledge from that sales team coming over, and it was really that helped us really very quickly, because it was. When I joined, Nike had one store in Osaka Tsunami Blossom. A great core team had opened that, but it was like 3 people. But we immediately, put in, hired a merchandising director. We, hired a, head of finance. We hired a store development team. Store construction team. HR team, operations team, which also oversaw all of the folks that actually went in the stores. Very quickly we were able to put that infrastructure in place and got Nike to a place where almost all of its sales were wholesale, to a point, because we needed to, because we had this huge inventory overhang, to where retail was about 35% of sales. Now, because retail is the price we sell at retail is easily double what the wholesale price is. It was, it was quite easy, on a math basis, to go to 35% of sales, because we were getting a higher price for the product we were selling relative to the wholesale sales teams. But still, it was a team effort. It happened really quickly. It happened because it needed to happen. I'm still to this day really proud of that team and keeping close touch with all those people. And that was part of it. It was kind of like this. We realized we had a mission. It kind of felt like Mission Impossible. And I'm sure anyone out there that started a new team, right? You go through that. You get the whatever office space you can get, because nobody knows what to do with you yet. And you'll grouse about it, but then later you look back and go, man, those were the days when we were like shoehorned in that corner, and no one was able to find us. And so went through all of that, and it was just an amazing experience. So I'm still delighted I never had a chance to open a Nike town in Tokyo.
Boy, I wish you'd sent me those shoes though back in the day. What they would be worth today.
My Asia Pacific marketing director in Portland, we often talked about, the apocryphal or cultural tales of them, digging up the big container of like the Atari ET game out in the desert. Even then we were talking about, if we buried a container of these Air Force whatevers out in the Mojave Desert and dug them up in 20 years, we could eat like kings. We could never figure out a system to do that, but we were aware.
Oh yeah. That's a retirement package right there, and so many of those things. I mean, I just, the evolution of kicks right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know when it started, and maybe you can tell me, but this shoe hoarding, this like every time new Nikes or Jordans come out, everybody's got to have them. They got to
Yeah.
go and get them. And they like a lot of people I know, a lot of guys I know, especially on the Air Jordan side, just have closets full of them, unopened, never worn, just in there. They love collecting shoes. I don't know. I won't say anything about it. It's just, I never would have thought that would be a thing when I was playing basketball in the 80s in high school.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, who knew? I wish I kept mine.
Well, it's,
go ahead.
You know, I think it's an art form, and it's of some of the first things that we begin to collect kind of, you know, earlier in our lives. The shoe is one of the few 3D. I don't want to elevate this to, you know, anything other than the fact that yes, it's just a kick, but it's 3-dimensional. It's been very carefully designed. It's got style, and I think it excites us in a way that apparel also excites us, but apparel is and always will be, by the nature of how we wear it and how we build it, essentially a 2D product. And so with footwear is one of the first things I think that is introduced to our lives, that particularly when we get out and we're, you know, first shopping for ourselves and that sort of thing. We're wearing it, but I don't think it necessarily hits us consciously as art, but it's collectible. It's not a figure like a GI Joe or something like that, but it's got that. It's physical and it's 3D, and it's quite often got a really cool design because a team spent a lot of time to figure out how to get that upper in just the right way, you know, on that sole, and they all smell wonderful. Again, that's just me having spent too much time in a Nike store, but
it's got the cool factor. I mean, it's got that cachet that stands the test of time, and it's always going to be worth something, and you know, it's never not. I don't think. Now, to said potential failures, right? So audience, if you have a box of tissues close by.
Well, I have more than the ones I sent in, but these were a couple of the better
stories
ones.
Coming. After Nike, you moved on to Sephora, where you led a turnaround, and then a shutdown, which was obviously must have been very difficult. So tell us what happened, why, and you know, and then I'll get to, like, you know, what did you learn and what would you do differently, you know, if you had to do it all over again. But tell us what happened.
So in 2001, I had the opportunity to go to work for Sephora Japan. This was my first representative director, kind of like, you know, the boss, like president job. And I'll be eternally grateful to the team that hired me there, and I was, you know, very well mentored. And but I was the third general manager in a period of 18 months. And I probably made things worse for myself, because recognizing that, I dragged my feet a little bit before finally joining. But there were 7 stores open. But the struggle at the time was it was very difficult to get local cosmetics companies to supply, because Aisonne, the department store with the most to lose from a new competitor, in as much as, in essence, the department stores, and this is true of many markets in Asia, but definitely Japan at the time, the department store cosmetics floor is its bread and butter. You do not mess with the department store cosmetics floor. And we did something that I called poke the bear. The first rule of commerce and life is never poke the bear. But my predecessor's predecessor had come in and done a lot of press that read, whether he intended to say this or not, I'll just say the way the press read was, we're here, we're going to wreck the department store cosmetics floor business. So of course, what my friend Mr. Muto and others at, Isetan and the other department stores did is they called up, the big suppliers here, whether it be Shiseido or smaller importers, but really important importers, because they handle skincare, which is incredibly important in Japan, called up and said, well, you can sell to Sephora, but your business will fall out a window here. So, because of that, Albion wouldn't return our calls. We were lucky that Shiseido did do some work with us. Even our internal, we were part of LVMH. The LVMH cosmetics brands worked with us because they were told to, but they were less than delighted. It was a real challenge. We were in a situation where we had to survive, and we had a lot of people rooting for us to not survive. And then on top of that, we had kind of an own goal situation in that we had our own private line, private label, and a lot of the product was fantastic, but it was, I thought, a number of us locally thought it was mispriced. And the reason we thought that is several of the lines were gathering dust in the stores. And, our planning team would go, we're getting great margins on this. It's terrific. But you've got to be able to, make money on this stuff. You've got to be able to sell it. So I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'll start that. I'll start over. It'll give me an opportunity to be briefer.
No problem.
So, we had a lot of product in the stores that was not turning. It was high margin, but we weren't selling a lot of it. And it was directly tied to the fact that we were overpriced. So the conversation we had with our planners was, we as a company would, prefer to get cash as opposed to a high percentage. So do we really need to do that? And say, well, does the company pay you in cash or percentage? Well, we get cash. We like that. The company likes that too. So we agreed to lower prices. That increased our turn, increased the number of units we were able to sell, and we actually made more money at the lower prices. Most of your retailers out there will understand that, as a classic gross margin return on investment factor going on there, where if you're someone like a Walmart and you've got a lower margin, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to fail. It means you're going to succeed because you're going to turn your inventory over more often. And we did that. So we got gross margin return on investment. We got our gross margin dollars up. We got a couple of the stores into the black. There were a couple really big stores that were too big for us to do that. But then 9/11 came. We were owned through DFS, and DFS had no customers in any of its duty-free stores anywhere in the world, no cash, and Arnaud and the LVMH group had to make a decision. Some businesses like the US already had over 70 stores, so it was too big to close and too big to immediately find a buyer. But Sephora in Germany was closed. I was asked to close Sephora in Japan. He sold the Phillips auction house, which I don't think he wanted to do. 9/11, like many folks, would had a really big impact, on the group and on us specifically. So we spent the very late portion of 2001 and then the first half of 2002 unwinding Sephora in Japan, which was a disappointment because Sephora had an amazing offer in that in one place you could get great skincare, you could get great color, and then if you wanted to also get fragrance, which is not as heavily weighted as a business in Japan, but was and still is important, you could get that all in one location. Mm-hmm. That plus a lot of other really cool things that if you're a cosmetics user were really difficult to find elsewhere. It can be humid in Japan. We sold a product that would seal your mascara, which is really important here. We sold a lot of it. So it was unfortunate because that place, that for that, went away. And I think because of the early challenges of the department stores, unique amongst all of the other markets, I don't think LVMH really looked seriously at ever opening Sephora in Japan again. In 2010, they did take one more look at it, and unfortunately the person who was kind of leading that charge passed away, and I think that was kind of the end of that second and last look. I still personally think that anytime the LVMH group wants to bring Sephora to Japan, it'll do well, but it's I think it's just been difficult, keeping in mind the need to preserve and not once again be seen to be poking the bear of the department store cosmetics floors, which are really important to the group. So,
so after that, you went with Reebok, just to double down on this little part of the episode.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so a lot of my colleagues from Nike later found themselves at Reebok. So I had this opportunity to once again work with some people that I really enjoyed working with. They wanted someone to help them start a retail story for them as well. So I got a group of investors together, and we opened Reebok's first store in Harajuku. At the time, Reebok was already, as a brand, aging a little bit. And by the way, that is not a negative in Japan, because the customer base in general in Japan has aged. But even so, it was still really important to try to reposition the brand for a younger consumer. And another reason for opening the store in Harajuku was to kind of be the pointy edge of that. But we quickly realized, and I should have realized earlier, but it took the experience of opening the store to discover fully that our 40-something customer base wasn't really large enough to support that store footprint, or more importantly, the store footprint we had envisioned. We wanted to open more stores. Adidas bought Reebok, and so the opportunity to further invest and get further support from Reebok also went away, and so unfortunately we had to close that store. So not every store opening ends in a happy story.
Yeah, but I mean, it sounds like you faced a lot of uncontrollable circumstances.
This is true,
right?
And also, the other thing I think that all of us working on that project learned was corporate cultures matter a lot. Nike has and continues to have a very can-do corporate spirit, and Reebok too is a great company and a great brand, but this is from the outside now. I've never worked for Reebok, but I would characterize it as more careful. And then definitely after Adidas acquired them, they just weren't in a place to do it. So the corporate cultures or the operating systems that the folks that we work with in these businesses, or that we actually go into, that company operating system, best intentions aside, really drives a lot of what we can actually do with strategy or anything else we do. So that was one of the big learnings that I got, is how important. And by the way, I want to be clear: there's no right or wrong corporate culture. Every corporate culture, I've also discovered over time, is evolved to be right for that entity. Later in life, I've discovered, I worked for Disney, which on the media side has for a very good reason, a very controlling corporate culture. Everything's to put that in a, to make it clear that this is a positive thing in a kind of lockdown, everyone knows what's next kind of way. Whereas someplace when I was at NBC Universal, it's kind of more the big tent. You've got, Steven Spielberg works on a lot, and you absolutely want to pay attention to what he wants and needs. And so there's different levels of how a company or a business will go about controlling. So coming back to the Reebok example, things that might have made sense for how we were doing work at Nike did not translate exactly to how they could be done within the context of Reebok, and that was an opportunity for me to learn that.
Okay. despite the challenges out of your control, anything that you feel like you yourself could have done differently, perceived differently, operationally, process managementally wise, done differently?
Merchandise was great. So in hindsight, what I should have done was get, a larger marketing. Were I able to have done it? I don't know that I could have, but get a larger marketing commitment from Reebok in writing such that when it was acquired, Reebok could say, well, Adidas, we understand what you want to do now, having come in and wanting to, control expenses and whatnot. But we're right in the middle of trying to reposition the brand here, and we've made these commitments. I didn't secure that. I was working with individuals that I believe, I didn't need that with. I could have done better homework and have discovered that even if I had 20 or 30 stores, the work of repositioning, I always respect what, like clockwork, a brand like LVMH, every maybe 10 or 20 years, they will bring in a new creative director, and they will completely remessage, and the models that they use will completely change, and they will completely reposition that brand for a new generation. And they're clear about it. They take the time to do that, but it takes a lot of work. And although we were trying to do that at Reebok, I really should have spent a lot more time studying what that would have taken. Not that, well, we'll open a store and it's going to be great, and then we're going to open 3 more, and then it's really going to be great. So I'd say probably a lack of homework on my part, and more homework, more commitment to the energy that it was going to take to get that repositioning done, I think would have made a difference.
Right. Okay, quick drink break, I think, right now. I'm just going to take some water.
Yeah. May I do the same?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't have one right here. I'll be right back.
Yeah, go get it.
Yeah, my apologies. I thought I had vetted for sound. I share an office here with my wife, and her phones have been going off in the back there, so I've just moved them into the other room.
I heard it once.
After the damage has been done. So,
it's fine. Again, you are your predecessors on the pod are typically worse. So you're all good. You're all good.
Well, that's small consolation, because I still have plenty of opportunity to top them.
Yes, you do.
I meant in the not good way.
It's still recording. I'm not going to say whether it's happening or not, but
all right.
Yeah. Let's move on to Disney.
Okay.
6 years at Disney, VP of Consumer Products, and that catalog of IP and products from Disney. It was funny when you were talking previously about, having a measure of control and my background in China. I thought, you know what? I really can't think of a brand that has had more trademark infringement around the world than Disney.
Yep.
So I thought maybe you were potentially even going to go into that, but
definitely can talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, how does one control or manage, if at all you even bother? Does it need to be addressed?
It does, but it's really something that you chip away at. And I was fortunate to be working in Japan, which Disney first opened in Japan in 1959. So it had been here already for a while. It had the benefit in Japan is it over time has come to benefit in China, and over time will continue to benefit in India. We kind of see this rolling understanding of what intellectual property is and what it means. And generally speaking, as each market has its own intellectual property that it needs to protect, the systems for protecting everyone's intellectual property improves. I remember back when I was working for Gap, I spent one day with Den Fujita, who's the founder of McDonald's Japan. He's the primary inspiration for Masayoshi Son over at SoftBank, and he talked about the years he spent trying to get the Big Mac trademark away from the squatter that had it in Japan. So, now we think of Japan as being buttoned down in terms of intellectual property, but it had its frontier days as well with, Some Love Hotel. If I remember right, the apocryphal tale was Some Love Hotel. For anyone not familiar with what love hotels are, they're the small boutique hotels along the expressways where if one needs to stop for a day stay, you can. Anyways, there was one of these hotels had registered Hilton, and Hilton Hotel struggled for quite a while to get its brand. So now we think of Japan as being completely buttoned down, and the problem territories are elsewhere. But each market goes through this, and I'm certain the U.S. was probably also the Wild West, in terms of intellectual property back in the 20s and 30s. I wasn't around then, so I'd need someone who knows more than me to tell me for certain. But we all go through that evolution. Yeah, I mentioned before how Disney tends to be controlling, and again, I think it's a positive thing. And my story for why I think that is so is when you learn Disney's history, Walt Disney lost his first character. So he and Ub Iwerks, his partner, worked on Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, and then his distributor took that character away from them because they didn't have the rights. And whether that right legally or not, it was it seemed through all of the stories that are told about that episode that it was like losing a child, and it was devastating. And Disney was really a two-person operation. Walt's older brother, Roy Disney, really managed the finances, and Walt also having, we talked about failure, and I would say the importance of failure. Disney at that point also had gone bankrupt, I think twice. So Roy was like, I'm an older brother, so I'm imagining Roy must have been super protective of Walt, just seeing his talent and whatnot. And so, when Mickey came along, they locked it down, and they locked everything down after that. And that's and so I use the words lockdown positively. They lock down their IP. They're very locked down financially, and I think those are all really important things and a part of that culture that's necessary. So when they do see these IP infringements, certainly as quickly as they can, they're chipping away at them and trying to get their IP portfolio, sorted in each of their markets as best they can. It's just a part of that DNA. That wasn't part of any IP holder's DNA, but Disney is definitely methodical about it.
In some of the research done before this episode to produce this episode, we pulled out a little nugget of the phrase "fish where the fish are," and wanted to ask you how that applies to your experience at Disney.
Well, it's one of my favorite phrases, and I use it everywhere. And how it applies to Disney was I started work in apparel licensing for them in 2004, and we had exactly one, maybe two licensees that were developing merchandise for the adult market. But the majority of our licensees were doing children's wear, which is traditionally Disney's strongest market. But we quickly realized that because of all of the wonderful work Disney had done, I previously mentioned they started here in 1959. They opened Tokyo Disneyland in, I want to say, 1993. 1983, sorry, 1983. So by the time I joined Disney on the licensing team, there are already three generations very familiar with, and probably more than three generations, but three generations: grandparents, parents, and children who like the characters and enjoyed, getting them a product. So, without doing anything to slow ourselves down in children's wear, we realized we had this huge opportunity in adult product. And I had the good fortune to work with leaders in the U.S. who understood what we wanted to do and were supportive of us, because it would have been very easy to say, we're Disney, we're going to stick to our lane, we're going to make product for, kids 2 to 7 or, 2 to 13 and be done with it. That's our sweet spot. But as we brought opportunities, they were really good about saying, yeah, go for it. See if that will work. And we went from a situation where our children's business was, over 90% of the business, to a place where I think even today, for Disney and also for a lot of other IP holders now too, they have character business, characters that look like they are, well, and are made for children. They're made for the, the children that resides in the hearts of all of us. But 60% of Disney's business in Japan.
Could you say that again?
60% of.
I'm glad you follow the orders. Yeah, I mean, say it again. That's awesome.
60% of Disney's business in apparel now, and accessories, footwear, home products now, is adult. And that would have been, when I joined in 2004, that was, I don't want to say it was unthinkable, but it certainly was. There was no structure for that. So, in fishing, where the fish were, we discovered those older generations still, had that child in them that had that great experience at Tokyo Disneyland or wherever it was, and they were still primed to, if you gave them a Mickey Mouse t-shirt with a slightly elevated design that, was something that they could wear in public, they were all over that and a pair of Nikes.
Yeah, I have some family members that are obsessed with Disney. They are my age, even younger. I have cousins that even her second marriage. I mean, it's always at Disney. Everything's at Disney. The trips are to Disney. Everything is at Disney. It's unbelievable. I've actually been to Disneyland in Tokyo. Just a fun fact.
Awesome.
The lineups were incredible.
Yes.
Of course, this was, I'm going to say this was like 1988, 89.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I was there from 8:30 a.m. Till about 10 p.m. and I stood in lines for probably about 8 hours of that day.
Yeah. We're in the U.S. now, post-COVID. I think this is probably changing, and I hear the U.S. theme parks are starting to look like the Japan parks. But 10 years ago, a full day at a Disney World or a Disneyland might be 20, 30,000 people. In Japan, it's not full unless there's 55,000 people in the park, and you're waiting 5 hours for attractions. That's full.
That's
for Japan.
That is
and regular.
Yeah. And I mean, I lived in China when the Disney opened in Shanghai as well. And I heard the stories and I said, I'm never going. I get the novelty, but I've been to it in Anaheim and in Orlando and in Tokyo, and I just was not going to go and do that.
Yeah, well, you have those options, so that's what I do too. I try to go to Orlando or Anaheim.
But I got kids now, and I'm going to be taking them very, very soon.
Yes,
maybe
we will.
Even this year. I am just trying to wait until if there's any dip in any time of the year to go, that's when I'm going to go.
Yes.
But I have to go, and I can't wait. I'm actually really, really excited to go back. It's been a very long time since I've been, and it is such a magical place. So, all right. Enough of the love fest for Disney, which I'm sure we all have. Moving on to Baroque
Japan. Yes,
Baroque Japan
Limited.
Okay, Baroque Japan Limited. You were the chief strategy officer. It is a Japanese fashion retailer, and this is going to be an interesting one because we're reversing the polarization here of the things that we talk about, because one of the things that you did was you took the brand brick and mortar to the US, did a pop-up store in New York City's meatpacking district. And although we usually talk about what it's like to, and leverage our guest expertise on how to get into markets in APAC, I do want to actually talk to you about what it was like for you to go the other way across the pond in reverse. So tell us about what you did, why you did it, what was effective, what wasn't, what you learned, all the things, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So opening the Mousy pop-up in Meatpacking District in New York was kind of a natural progression of what the brands were already doing. So for anyone who doesn't know, Mousy is the flagship brand of this Japanese apparel company called Baroque Japan Limited, and roughly speaking, young women's fashion is broken into Shibuya 109 fashion, or brands that predominantly started in a fashion building in Shibuya called Shibuya 109. That's just off that big scramble crossing that you see in all the movies of Tokyo. And then in Harajuku, we have another big shopping building called La Forêt, and Mousy is a solid Shibuya 109 brand. So started there, a lot of denim, but Japanese style denim, a lot of ring spun stretch denim, very fashionable for 20 something customer, and then the kind of the tops to go with that. And so my introduction to Baroque was via Disney. While I was at Disney, they were one of our largest licensees. They did a lot of really cool Mickey Mouse T-shirts to go with all that cool denim. And then I had the opportunity to join them when they actually were for a time they were looking at listing on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, and so I was hired to help them on those tours. But along the way, we had the opportunity to take the brand to the U.S. And this is after they'd already opened in Taiwan. They had stores in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and mainland China. They had two subsidiaries. Baroque Shanghai Limited and Baroque Beijing Limited, and ran the stores in all the places you would expect to find them in China, Sanlitun Village, and so on and so forth. So, and the idea was, let's also demonstrate that we can do this by going to the U.S. No one will be surprised to hear that we had the same issues in reverse to go to the US. The sizes were too small. We had customers that would come in and struggle to get into 24 waist. And you know, we didn't have enough time to, you know, up spec a lot of the product for that pop-up. Sold a lot of tops. But it was an amazing experience. The merchandising director at the time, Yamamoto-san, was amazing to work with because he, you know, brought the DNA. We had the launch was really amazing. We had the opportunity to kind of do a hijack of Fashion Week. We dressed about this was back when the whole flash mob thing was still just starting up, and we took a large number of the models, about 30 models, put them in Mousy merchandise, had them just, you know, ride around to all the different kind of Fashion Week locations, get out of limos and walk around and take selfies, and it was a lot of fun. So brands can absolutely go the other way. There was still work that needed to be done, and I think they've subsequently done that in terms of working out the spec and that sort of thing. But Japan has its own unique take on denim, and in some regards, it's, you know, folks who are familiar with denim will know that, you know, the ring spun denim out of Okayama and that sort of thing. They've you know, they've done some new and different things like stretch denim and that sort of thing. So that product was a lot of fun to introduce to a U.S. customer.
Right on. Okay, I want to move, and thank you for that. Move on to Aisonne. Okay.
Yep.
Tell us what it is. I know, you know, we're helping brands go to market in Asia. Tell us a little bit about where it came from, and then let's start with from where you're sitting, you know, and dive into the major mistakes that you're seeing brands make in the Japanese market that really your positioning and your expertise and knowledge is really there to say, hey, these are the mistakes a lot of brands are making, and here's why we're here, and here's how we're going to help you not make those ones again. They'll make those same mistakes.
So Aisonne really started, you know, I explained how we closed Sephora. While I was closing Sephora, it was becoming clear that Sephora was going to leave, but with the management team at Sephora Japan, we were looking for some way to preserve some form of a more accessible cosmetics business. So on our own, because there was a brief window where we thought it would be possible for us to continue the business, but not under the Sephora brand, because Sephora clearly wanted out. With my then marketing manager and a few other people, we came up with a brand that was sufficiently vague that could possibly be used on such a format, and we came up with a color palette that was really based to kind of marry up you know, skincare and color. So the two company colors were really a foundation beige and an eyeshadow blue, and that's really where Aisonne comes from. But then of course that went away, and I got, you know, now I own a brand, a logo, I have a color story, and I'm looking for work, and I started a consulting company. I said, what am I going to call it? I'm going to call it Aisonne, but now it means eyes on. That's what it means. And so that was the origin. And so started at one of my first customers was JPhone, which was had just been acquired by Vodafone, and they were looking to rebrand. So I had an opportunity to help them. They had gotten a quote from a big advertising firm here, Dentsu, that for 200 million, Dentsu would make sure that all 2,000 stores got turned red. You know, I came in with my, you know, store development background and, you know, a really good, you know, store development team, and said, you know, if we bid this out and we bid it out regionally, we can save a lot of money. And so we were able to do that for them. You know, going forward, I had an opportunity to work with Apple. My first work as Aisonne for Apple was putting in what they called Apple Solution Consultants. I worked with a team that our big electronics big box retailers here, like say Best Buy in the U.S., are Yodobashi Camera, Big Camera, and Apple had sales floors there, but the individuals on those floors were all kind of provided on a semi or part-time basis by the big box retailers. And what Apple had found, Tim Cook's team at the time, Tim Cook was head of operations, sales reported to him. What they'd found in the US was that at the places like CompUSA or at the time, I guess Circuit City, that if Apple had its own people there, then the Apple polo shirt, that folks were getting better advice and it was easier for them to sell. So we did that program. That led to an opportunity in the very early days to do a little bit of consulting with Apple in Cupertino on coming to Japan. They had done a consulting round with another firm that told them that to succeed in Japan, they would have to change everything. And we said, yes. We went in and said, yes, Japan is a different place, but what Japan is really looking from you is your authenticity. And for anyone who knows Steve Jobs, they were never going to change anything anyway. So I cannot take any credit for this, but they came in exactly as Apple. Obviously, they brought in the kind of more the Japanese, that customer service ethos of the salesperson maybe being a little bit closer to you on the floor, so you can get a question answered quickly. There's a general perception, I think, and I don't think this is exclusive to Japan and Asia, that everyone is a little circumspect and quiet. But I think most people will agree with me that the customers in Asia, definitely in Japan, are very particular. They're very loud. And in Japan, the Japanese actually have a word for them, which is kind of funny. It's called heavy claimer. Heavy claimers are your asset. You listen to your heavy claimers, you accommodate them, and you come out with a business that you can take anywhere in the world. That's the advantage that the heavy claimer gives you. So you want to listen to your heavy claimers. Apple came and was Apple, and just briefly at the very beginning of that, but Apple knew exactly what they wanted to do, and they didn't need much help to do it because they came in as Apple, as they should. And it's been great to kind of see them go on. I had a chance to work with some great Japanese retailers. I think maybe Japan does some of the best and most beautiful fruit in the world. This will sound strange, but in Japan, gift giving is incredibly important, and I think this is also, you see this across Asia. So I don't think this is a Japan exclusive, but there's a particular store in Shinjuku. There are 2 or 3 of these, multi-generational, family-owned stores that do like fruit gift sets. Just amazingly, very expensive. A flat of 12 strawberries, $80. But the first time you get a flat of these strawberries and you cut through them, and there's not a bit of hollowness, they are solid fruit all the way through, and they're super sweet, melt in your mouth. You go, wait. But where I come from, there's a trade-off. You can either have a big strawberry or a delicious strawberry, but you can't have a big, delicious strawberry. Well, they fixed that here. I had a chance to go with them. They were working on a rebranding, and so I worked with their team to slightly update their logo. And I would say I was in the room and able to provide some suggestions, but really they really had a grasp of what the mission was, and I think they did a really great job on that. So along the way, I've had a chance to work both with Japanese brands, even just here for the Japanese market. I've had a chance to work with some businesses that are headed to the US and then coming here. In terms of what's being missed or what mistakes are made or what the opportunities are, I'd say right now that the maybe one of the things that's being missed is it's easy to look at Japan and its aging market, and it's definitely aging, and go, well, that's not a consumer market. But coming back to the combination of fish where the fish are, and then the other thing is no matter where you go, I think we all know this, but there's no market cohort that's going to magically appear and we're going to sell to an all new market. We always have to be taking share from somewhere. And I'd say, don't shy away from that. If you have a superior product, compelling merchandise, attractively displayed and appropriately priced, with your story and with the needed marketing, you're absolutely going to be able to take share here. And it's still a huge market. There's still almost 1 million babies being born every year. It's still a very large and influential market. So I'd say if you're not certain about whether to come to Japan or not, yes, right now we're going through this because of the interest rate differential, kind of a period with weaker yen. So you might want to use this period of time to study the market. But I definitely say Japan is still a very attractive market. And particularly now, I'm working with a lot of partners who, even with all of the challenges, want to be here because they find that when their product is in, say, for example, a really influential retailer like Beams, which is kind of like our Fred Siegel, or I know the Barney's is no longer with us in the US, but it has that kind of positioning. And so quite frequently I'm talking with people who say, can you get us into Beams? I can't always. They're very particular, but we've been successful in Beams has got this wonderful, their CEO Stada-san, I just super admire. He's got a real playful heart. They do amazing merchandising. And there's always an opportunity to do a new collaboration or something different with them. They're great marketers themselves. They have a great store blog. So if you do something at Beams, everybody in Japan's going to see it. And what we've also discovered is people outside of Japan pay a lot of attention to that too. So there is a cachet of and I think Supreme benefit. I mean, Supreme recently was sold to VF for a couple billion, and I think there's still a lot of that Japan streetwear authenticity or Japan authenticated product being able to do great work for you everywhere. So if you're thinking of coming to Japan, there's no wrong time, and definitely this is a good time to begin to study the market. I don't think the yen differential will last forever, talking about the current exchange rate. So I definitely recommend people have take a close look at Japan for a future opportunity if they're not here yet.
Yeah. Okay. What about the impact of COVID? I mean, over the last 30 months, what are the changes, the shifts? I don't think it'd be fair to say what are the huge changes, because there just might not be any, but what have you noticed as an impact coming out of COVID that was temporary and ones that might be a little more tenured?
I think like everywhere, the first year was, everyone kind of, bunkered down. That was certainly the case with me and my family and most others, but everyone is now out and about. I mean, to the point where it's, it's on TV here every morning that COVID rates are starting to pop back up. Generally speaking, the way Japan has managed COVID is they've looked at available hospital beds and then they've kind of set their the level of lockdown accordingly. Post World War II, the Japanese government does not have the ability to force people to stay in. So no one's permanently locked in, but they've advised at different times where, hospital beds are starting to be less available. They've set rules about what times restaurants have to close, and they've closed restaurants earlier or have told restaurants not to serve alcohol. But I think importantly, they haven't been able to force anyone to do that. And there were a few restaurants that continued to serve alcohol and just paid the fine. But now things are more or less open. Really, we're just waiting for the country to open up. And company as a Freudian slip. Sometimes the countries run like a company or can feel like that. The current administration, the Kishida administration, watched the Suga administration struggle with COVID, and I think one of the the conventional wisdom is that COVID was one of the factors that made Suga maybe have to resign early. So Kishida is being very careful to not make that mistake. And so, and understand, this is my opinion. This is my reading of the situation. So he's been very careful to be seen to be not opening the country up too quickly. But we do have a general election. Today's July, so this month, and the consensus is that sometime after this general election, where it can't immediately come back to affect anyone politically, in immediate voting, is that things will be opened up a little bit more. So pack your bags and buy tickets for August would be my advice.
Yeah.
Well, or not. It's going to be hot. It is so hot here right now.
Take advantage of the exchange and
that too. Yes, it's a great time to if you've had your eye on buying a company in Japan, it's a great time to do that, or a brand. Japan has really high debt, just like the U.S. and many other developed countries. But the difference is that most Japanese debt is held by the Japanese themselves. So there does seem to be less pressure on Japan's central bank to raise rates, and accordingly, there is still a chance that this differential between the US and Japan interest rates, and therefore the downward pressure on the yen, could continue. This is not investment advice. But if you are planning a business, just by way of caution, I would think that the yen might continue to weaken. So just if you're hedging or planning anything, if you already have a business here, please don't beat up your domestic team. They're still earning good money in yen. It just doesn't look as great when you put it in another currency. This too will change that.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Got it. That's
but if you want to buy something here, this is the time.
Yeah, exactly.
So in September and October, come for the fall colors and come shopping.
Yeah.
And make your restaurant bookings now, because they'll all be full.
Maybe a condo for some Airbnb or something.
There you go. No, it's been great. We've seen a lot of folks coming from Hong Kong to buy real estate again. So
yeah, that's great. Last question. Well, actually, second last question. But with regards to maybe Aisonne, are there one or two technology trends, technologies or trends, that you think might have a major impact on commerce in Japan over the next decade?
I mean, right now, I know it's trite. I know everyone is doing it, but the whole trend towards everything as a service. Actually, my meeting this afternoon is with a company that runs 3PL, and they currently handle mango out of Spain. And I'm going to talk to them to see, what else we could do. This is a potential way of reducing costs and therefore making prices even in the weaker yen still attractive. Won't be for every brand. If you have a high-end brand and you need to maintain your price point, you might want to wait out the current kind of weakness in the yen. But so that's one of the areas, is the continuing efficiencies that we're seeing in how we manage supply chain, how we deliver product to the department stores. A lot more digitalization, not just on e-commerce, but in the handling of paperwork. And I know these are global trends, so I apologize. I'm not giving you anything new that's kind of unique to Japan. And I apologize for that. A lot of that has to do with the fact that, like many of you, post-COVID, I'm just getting out and meeting with people. So, for example, me meeting with these folks that have this, logistics as a service, if you will, e-commerce business. This is, my first time to actually meet them. You would think that I know everyone. The one thing I will be clear about is I don't consider myself an expert on Japan, because every day customers are making a new decision about what they want to buy. So I'm with every other listener and all of the wonderful hosts guests you've had. I've learned so much from your podcast because of that, because things are and it's a good thing, changing every day. So if I get any updated information, I'll pass it along. But I'd say right now, it's what we're seeing everywhere is the continued, efficiencies in supply chain digitalization, and not just of the the end customer experience, but everything that goes into providing the product to the customer.
Yeah, that's why it gives us great. The horizon for this podcast is so far in the distance because everything keeps changing and it changes so fast now.
Yes.
That I don't even know how the McKinseys of the world are going to be able to keep up and produce enough content that's relevant for a long enough period of time to be able to keep doing it. So that's great. And thanks to guests like yourself as well for coming on and keeping everybody's finger on the pulse. Question for you before we go. Tell us about Green Valley Olive. How'd you create this company? What is this company? What am I talking about that people have no idea and didn't know it was coming? And where can listeners get some?
So I think I previously mentioned I'm from a little town called Placerville. I have a few friends who grow grapes, but I could never do that as well as them. I've always loved olive oil, and going to Italy, I discovered they don't send the good stuff abroad. They keep it and consume it themselves. So I started growing olives, making olive oil. And what we offer that's kind of rare in the general olive oil world is we offer complete traceability. All of our olive oil comes from specific groves. The enemies of olive oil are heat, time, light. The light bit gets missed. So even though your olive oil comes in a beautiful green bottle, which does protect the olive oil from what we call photooxidation and keeps it from getting rancid too soon, olive oil eventually gets rancid. So if you ever smell olive oil and it smells oily, that's you're an expert on oil. That's your expert system telling you that oil is probably not very delicious anymore. But that whole process can still accelerate in glass. So we package in a special steel, we still call it a bottle, but it's basically a special steel can made for us in Austria, purpose built for oil, for high grade olive oil. And then traceability, protection against photooxidation, and the carefulness with what we package. And then the third thing is that our package is also lighter than glass. So when I send to Japan, I can send 4 bottles for the carbon footprint of 3 glass bottles. Wow. It's not a lot, but every little bit helps. So yeah, this is my hobby. What we're really good at is the quality side. What I'm dreadful at, some of you will be understanding, and some of you will eventually get to understand this. No matter how good one thinks one is at marketing, one could be really bad at it for themselves. So I'm a do as I say, don't do as I do. So we're great on the production side, but I really need to hire WPIC to help me with the marketing because I am just dreadful at it. My website needs work. I could go on with the list here, but I'll just stop there and say we like the product, but it needs a lot of work. And if any of you with any of your businesses out there can relate to that, well, yeah, isn't that business? That's life.
Yeah. How many authors out there that are just absolutely literary geniuses are held up being best writing authors and not being best selling authors?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it happens to the best of us. So choose your publishing house wisely, I guess, is the takeaway. Yeah. As we like to do now, we want to call out a couple of guest recommendations from you. Get their name, get them voiced on the show, so that we can go to them and say, "Hey, Jeff threw you under the bus on a recent episode, and now our audience is going to be really sad if you don't show up and do this thing." So, who have you got for us?
I'd say my colleague, and I'm going to use the Japanese word, but senpai. Senpai is our no matter what their age, if someone is a mentor to you, we'll use that word, like our senior teacher. So Alan Wang, who's my contemporary at NBC Universal, and we also work together at Disney. He is currently head of consumer products licensing at Riot Games in Shanghai. Amazing person with amazing experience across Asia. I think he'd be really interesting to talk to.
Okay.
I would say Lester Lee, who was my colleague who ran apparel at Nike when I was working at Nike, first in retail and then marketing. He also went on. I had the opportunity to work with him at Disney. And while he's now retired, he's back living in Shanghai and also has great stories about when you're first starting a licensing business in China, what it actually takes to collect the royalty checks and other things. Of course, times have changed. So, but in his word, I don't want to steal his thunder, but my recollection was it was a lot of golf.
It probably
so I mentioned those two, and I can definitely come up with others, but one of the things I've really enjoyed about this podcast is just so much it's taught me about China. So I apologize about once again suggesting a couple folks who know China, but both of those individuals know Japan really well as well. Alan speaks Japanese. Lester lived in Japan for a long time. So in terms of just general Asia knowledge as well.
That's okay. We're just, we're spreading our wings here at the negotiation and wanting to, offer up alternate markets for others as well. You're right. I mean, we've covered a ton of China, and now we want to look at, obviously getting into the other big markets over there, like Japan and Korea and Indonesia, Vietnam, other things like that. So, I mean, it's this is how we go. So anyway, Jeff, thanks so much for coming on the show. It was amazing. Thank you for putting in so much work and giving us so much information for so long. I think these episodes are going to be amazing. Can't thank you enough for coming on the show.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right. And for those of you who are watching us, don't forget that we do have the podcast over on Google Podcasts and Spotify and Apple Podcasts and everything. So for those watching on the YouTube channel, please make sure, if you want to, or if you're going to be doing something where you need to use your eyes, like driving, we always have the podcast to complement other activities that you do. Make sure you go and see us over there. But from all of us at the Negotiation and WPIC Marketing Technologies, and for Jeff, we say goodnight, and thanks very much for enjoying the show.